In this advanced tutorial, I'm going to show you how to build a children's picture book generator that creates stunning illustrations based on certain animations or artwork that you like. The way it works is quite simple. We click Create a New Story. We select a story type. In this case, we have a predefined 9-chapter story type that's based on the hero's journey. So they go out on an unexpected adventure, they have some challenges, and then they return home to a nice cozy ending. You can add more to this, but we'll start with just 9 chapters. Then we select an illustration style, and these are separate AI LoRAs that we've trained on various animation artwork and illustrations. We can add to this as many as we want, but I'm going to select Aristocats as an example. And here we put a story idea. So this is where you can actually enter the idea for your story. Then we can set a story location. So we can say beautiful meadow in autumn. And then we can select some themes. So maybe there's certain messages or themes we want to get across in the story. So we can select things like bravery, courage, curiosity, friendship, and hope. You can add more to this if you want. I've limited it to 5. And then we click Submit. And what this is going to do is it's going to generate all of the chapters for your storybook. It's going to generate all of the characters for your storybook. It's then going to generate custom illustration descriptions to generate the illustrations for each chapter with very detailed, in-depth descriptions of the characters that appear in those chapters. And what we're left with is a very concise, beautiful illustration that is very accurate to the illustration style that we selected. And if there's ever an image that we don't like, that is not really fitting, we can regenerate it. And so these are all actually looking very, very good. So I don't really want to regenerate any, but I can regenerate, for example, this one just to show you what it looks like. So we can regenerate images to get them more aligned with the rest of the book. We can edit the chapter. So if there's anything we want to take out or add, we can do that here. Then we move on to the next step, which is selecting a book cover and or editing the title. In this case, I'm going to leave the title as is. I think it's quite nice. And we can select a nice cover. I think that's a great cover. We go to the final stage, which is reviewing the book. We have the cover here. We have all of the various chapters that have this beautiful curvy edge to them. So we're going to learn how to leverage composite images in N8N to actually edit the images that AI has generated. And we review all the chapters. If it all looks good, we click Confirm and Create, and we have a beautiful picture book instantly generated with custom Google fonts. You can then download this PDF. You can open it up and you can see that we have beautifully separated chapters with illustrations. This is going to be a fantastic tutorial. I really look forward to taking you through it. Let's get into it. With any good Glide app that you're building, it all starts with the data. If your data's not in order, then your app is going to be a mess. And so we're going to start with the data, and we're going to start with the types table. So as with usual in my tutorials, we start with kind of the simplest tables and move towards the more complex tables that actually pull in information from these simpler tables. So the first table we want to establish, we're going to add a blank table, and I'm going to give it a little arrow because this is going to be part of the settings, and so we'll categorize this under the settings. And I'm going to call this, and by the way, this little arrow is just for visual reference. It doesn't do anything, but it's important to keep your apps organized. So the first table we're going to add is types, and this is where we're going to specify different types of stories. So we can have a basic 9-chapter picture book. We can have a more complex 18-chapter picture book, but maybe for a slightly more elevated age group, so on and so forth. This is where you can define different types of stories, like the type we're going to be rolling with for this example, this tutorial, is a bit of a hero's arc. You know, they set out on an unexpected adventure, they run into challenges, and then they end up returning home to a nice cozy bed, that sort of thing. So how you define your arc is up to you, but we're going to start with, of course, the row ID. and then I'm gonna change this to type/name. And usually I delete this initial column. Those who are familiar with my previous tutorials know why, but we're gonna save it. We're gonna roll with efficiency today. So here we just want to call this type, we can call it, basic picture book 9 chapters. And so what this is going to give us is some options that the user can select to determine the type of book they actually want to create. So the next thing we need to do is define the chapters arc. And what this is a text column, but I'm going to copy over some information from another screen and I'll show you what that looks like. So what I'm putting here is a JSON array of all of the chapters and the type of chapter I want it to be. If we're rolling with this hero's arc theme or type of story, in chapter 1, we meet the happy main character. In chapter 2, a small surprising thing happens. So this is a call to adventure. In chapter 3, they are intrigued by this thing. They set out on the adventure, so on and so forth. And so what we're doing is we're already establishing the framework of the story we want. And all of this is really important because we need to give AI structure and templates and JSON to work off. Otherwise, the results we get are going to be all over the place. So we want structure. We want concrete structure. So we've got chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then the story ends happily with a cozy feeling. If you're reading this to kids, you may want to end all the stories in a happy way. But again, you can customize this how you want. So this is the structure, the arc. And if you're part of Loqode Masters, you can just copy and paste this in. Otherwise, I can just scroll slowly and you can see what it all is. The main thing is the structure of each object within this array. It starts with the chapter number or the chapter, and then we have an object here that has a description, a title, content, and illustration. And you'll understand what all of this means as we progress. The most important thing is that it's structured exactly like this in order to work with the app that we're building. And if you were going to add more chapters, you just put a comma and then copy and paste this a couple of times for however many more chapters you want. Okay, so we've done that, and then the last thing is just going to be like a total number. So we're going to say chapter total, and we just make it a number. I think it can be text, it doesn't actually matter, but we'll make it a number, and we're just going to say, based on this arc, we know that there are 9 chapters. And this is going to be used for the progress bar, seeing how many chapters we've generated in compared to the total. So that's it for the types table. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the next table we're going to add is the themes table. And these themes, pretty straightforwardly, is going to be a list of different themes that you want to base your story around, or you want the message. What sort of message do you want to get across? Now, there's a lot of themes, so what I'm going to do is import them. And you can see I've got some baby Hercules images here for previous stories, but I'm just going to go to downloads and select themes, and I'm going to upload that. And so what this is, it's very basic. It's just a list of different themes like hope, courage, bravery, friendship, kindness, love, all of that sort of stuff. And the reason we're adding this is because we want the user to be able to change the tone and the theme of the story. They may want to get a certain message across, and with this, they can do that. So I'm going to delete this existing name column, and I'll add a row ID just for good measure. We don't actually use it in this particular app, but it's always good practice to add it. So we have theme/name as the title, And then we have all of these. So again, if you're not copying and pasting from Loqode Masters, you can still create your own list. So we have all of these. You can pause and check them out. And then from that down to honesty is this. And then we have hope down to perceptiveness. And we have, perseverance down to service. And we have sharing down to zeal. So all different types of themes. You don't have to use them all. You don't have to use any really, but it just allows the user to actually customize the story a little bit more. So that is the themes table done. So let's move on to the next table, which is going to be the steps table. And this is another table that is categorized kind of under settings. So we'll add this little emoji and we're going to say steps, and we can drag it to the top just to keep things consistent. I will add a row ID, and I can just leave this and edit it as I want. So the first column we're going to have is the step/name. In fact, this is going to be step/number. And we need to set a number for the step, because this is what is actually going to feed into our progress bar. So we can leave this as an integer, and we don't need a group separator. So it's just going to be a basic number. And we'll add 3 rows, because in this case, we have 3 steps that the user is going to go through. This is in addition to the initial creation of the story. So here we're just going to say 0, 1, and 2. And so we're starting at step 0, because we want to kind of treat it as an array sort of thing. So the first item is going to be item 0. Then what we want to do is we can just duplicate this, and we can say step name, and we're just going to make this a basic text column, and we're going to say chapters. This is going to be the book cover, and then we're going to have a review page. So step 0 is editing and refining your chapters. 1 is book cover, 2 is the final review. Then what we want to do is add a step/title, and this is what we're going to be displaying in a title component. Okay, so each step will have a name. This name is going to appear in our progress bar, but then we have a bit more expansive title and a subtitle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to add subtitle as well. And I'm just going to copy to save time typing. I'm just going to copy and paste some values here. But you can see here that the title that we want to display for the chapter step is refine your chapters. And then we're saying something like edit the chapter content or images if you want. Then we have refine your book cover, select an image title or create your own. And then in the final step, we have review your book, and the subtitle is check that everything is A-OK. So this is where we're setting up the actual multi-step form for the creation of the book. And that's all we need to do for this particular table. So let's move on to the next. All right, so the next table we're going to add is the general settings table. And this is what we can consider all of the other tables to fall under. But really, like I said, it's just for visual purposes. We're just going to call this settings. We're going to drag it above these other ones, so we kind of know that these are also sub-settings in a way. But again, purely organizational visual purposes only. So what we want to do here is add a row ID. And then we're going to change this basic column. We're going to change it from name to image overlay, and we're going to make this an image. And what we're doing here is we're going to upload an overlay, a mask, an image that has some transparency in the center with curvy edges. And what we're going to do is we're going to compose that on top of the images that AI generates, because AI naturally generates images with square, pointed corners and straight edges. And so what we want to do is we want to soften that a little bit. I don't want really square images in my little picture book. So I'm going to upload an overlay of like a curvy border, and we're going to paste that on top. And so the image itself is going to have a nice softer edge. And so we can upload this, and it's this cloud overlay. You can see this kind of mask that we're going to add on top. It's a PNG image. And if you're part of Loqode Masters, you can just download it or use the one that's in the classroom, or you can create your own. All it is, as you can see here, is just a white bordered PNG image with a transparent center that we're going to kind of put on top just to soften the edges of the images in the picture book. So that's the first thing. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add a column called N8N test mode. Now, this is optional. This is just an easy way that I've created to trigger and swap back and forth between the test mode webhook endpoint and the and the production endpoint. So we just make that Boolean. You can make it user specific. This will actually, no, sorry, we don't want it user specific. We want it in general. So we've got this N8N test mode, and then what we're going to do is add a final column here called N8N, and this is going to be the image endpoint. And we're going to make this an if then else, and we're going to say if test mode is checked, then we're going to say test mode, and else we're going to say production. Now what we'll do is when we actually create this webhook endpoint, both the test mode and the production one, we'll come back and replace this. But for now, we just want to make sure that it's all up and running. So you can see that if I go into test mode, it's the test mode endpoint, and if I come out of it, it's the production endpoint. Now, something to be aware of is that if you are targeting this particular URL, this endpoint, with columns in other tables, if you flick back and forth between production and test mode, you may trigger additional API calls, which means your usage is going to go up, your updates will increase. But in terms of developing in the beginning, we're going to use this a few times once we're setting it up, and then we will essentially leave this off, and we can even hide it just to make sure that we're not additionally triggering this endpoint by accident. So that's what we want to do here. I'll just unhide this. That is the general settings table done. What we're going to do next is set up the models endpoint. So let's move on to that. All right, so now that we've set up the general settings table, we're going to add one more sub settings table, and this is going to be called trained models. And so what I'm going to do is add this little drop down, and I'm going to say trained models, or you can just call it models. And I'm going to drag this to the second item here. And the reason I've done the main settings table first is because this also involves actually training the model, and that'll be the next video. So what we're going to do is we'll just add a row ID, and then we're going to change this to model/name. And in this case, I've got 3 models that I've trained, and so I'm going to add 3 rows preemptively. But once we've done that, we can duplicate this, and we need to add a trigger word. Now this trigger word will be set when we actually create the model, and what this does is it allows the AI to know that you want it in a specific style, and this really helps with consistency in terms of illustration styles and characters. So we're going to add this model trigger column. We're going to duplicate this, and we're going to say the model endpoint, and I'll just spell it correctly. And the last column we're going to add is the model image, and we're going to make this an image column, and we're going to save. So we've got these placeholders, and what I'm going to do is copy over some information, but I'm going to show you how to create this information. So it didn't copy the images. So what I can do is just add these images now. So let's just search for, let's just say that this is Studio Ghibli. This one is going to be 𝗧𝗵𝗾𝗂𝗃𝗧𝗃. And this one is going to be, do I have any baby Hercules anywhere? I can't remember where I saved that. Loqode Masters. Where did I save it? Hercules. There we go. Baby Hercules. So we'll just select that. And all this is doing is when we create this select component, it just gives a visual reference for what they're picking. Although it's going to be very small, you can also change the way you allow them to select and use a collection component. But for now, we've just set these images. So we've got Studio Ghibli, we've got the 𝗧𝗵𝗾𝗂𝗃𝗧𝗃, and we've got the baby Hercules. And so now that we've set up this train model table, in the next video, I'm going to show you how to actually train a model on a particular style. So let's get on to that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you how to actually create your own trained models for image generation. And to do that, we need to head to a website called Fal.ai. So Fal.ai. And what you'll need to do is create an account. It's free to create, and I do believe you get some free credits initially. And once you've created your account, you do need to have some sort of balance in order to create these trained models and then run generations. So none of this image generation is free, although it's very cheap. The only, and the reason is because we're using the best models. Now you can use other services. You can probably find a way to do this on Hugging Face, or you can create the model here, load it onto Hugging Face, and then run instances of that. But that can lead to degraded performance because the servers might shut off for a bit while it's not being used, and then when you want to use it again, it has to spin up the servers. And Fal is just a fantastic service that is constantly updating their models. And once you've actually generated the trained model, it's only 3 cents to create a beautifully styled image. So a picture book is just 9 chapters multiplied by 3 cents. So pretty reasonable in my opinion. But you will need some balance. And once you've created your account, what you want to do is head to this one, 𝗥𝗲𝗾𝗂𝗃𝗃 Fast Training. And what this is going to allow you to do is actually train a model fast to actually generate images in a particular style. And you can see here I've generated some models previously on various different illustration styles. But all you need to do here, and we're doing this from Fal because to set up in Glide is not needed. Once we've created the model, all we need is the endpoint, the LoRa endpoint. And so once you've done that, once you've created your account, you've got some balance, we're going to add some images. And the images you want to add are maybe some stills from the animation that you like. So you can see here, this is Hercules. And in particular, I got these stills from the beginning of the movie when Hercules is a little baby, because we're doing children's picture books, and I figure it's going to be cooler to do baby Hercules instead of Hercules. So download some images and click open. And what that'll do is it'll load that in. There is a different method where you can upload a zip file that has an image and a text file with the same name, with the text file describing the image to give the AI a little bit more context. But I found that this works just fine if you upload the images themselves. And but you can experiment. You're more than welcome to experiment. Just be aware that training the model costs $2. So every time you train a model and test stuff, it's going to be $2. But once you've done that and you've set that up, we want to add a trigger word. So this is where we would put something like baby Hercules, or whatever it is, the type of illustration you're doing, you would put the trigger word here. And we don't actually need to change any other settings. It will do just fine as is. You can increase the steps if you want, but that I believe it also increases the charge. So if you increase the steps, it might go to $2.50 or $3, whatever it is. And it's not necessary at this point. Once we've done that, click Start, and you'll see on the right-hand side that you'll get it'll say in progress, and you can kind of view logs to just see the progress of it. Once that's done, it'll take 1 or 2 minutes. You'll be presented with something that looks like this. And what you can do is, I'll just go to a previous model. You can actually run a test. So I'm going to say time aristocrats, a cute black cat in a lovely open meadow. And it's using that LoRa that we trained on those images. And we can see that we need to include the trigger word here. And so if I click run, you can see that it tells you what it'll cost down here. So it's 3.5 cents. And there we go. We've got a little black cat in a meadow, and it's in the style of Aristocats. So for now, this is all we actually need to do, because what we can do is copy this, and you may want to run a test, but we can copy this path, okay, this endpoint for the LoRa, come back here and paste it as this endpoint. And so once you've trained a model and you've set up the row for that particular model, this part of the tutorial is actually done, and we can move on to the next, which is building out the chapters and the story and doing some final tweaks to the user table. So I'll see you in that video. Okay, so we've created our model, and we've created the trained models table that includes all the information related to that model. What we need to do now is add the stories table. So we'll wait for this to create, and I'm going to make this a little book, and we're going to say stories, and we can drag this up underneath the user table. And of course, the first thing we're going to do is add a row ID, and then we're going to start manipulating some of these columns. So what we want to do is add something called story idea, and this is where the user is actually going to put their idea for the story. Then we can duplicate this, and we can say this is the story. Oh, what am I doing? Story setting. So this is the location, and I'm just referencing the previous app that I created because there's quite a lot of columns here. So create the story setting, and we can duplicate this, and we can add something called story/themes, and this is just a text column, and this is where we're going to store that comma separated list of all of the themes that we want to include in the story. So the next one is the type ID, and this is where the type, when we select this, and it'll be just one in the beginning because we've only created one type so far, but this is where the ID of the type is going to be pasted. So jump back to stories, and what we can do is we can actually begin to look up the relation. So we add a column to the right, and this will be type related, and we're going to create a relation where the type ID matches the type's row ID. And so what I'll do now is just go here and copy this, and you can do the same. Copy this, come back to stories, and paste the ID so you can actually see it begin to pull in some of that data. Now what we need to do now is go to type, and we can call this the arc, and this is going to be that chapter arc from the type. So we're going to look up, use the lookup column from the types, the chapter arc. And what this does is it pulls in those chapters we created before. And the last thing we want to do for this particular thing is type, and we're going to say chapter count. And we're going to look up the chapter total. And I'm just going to change this. That should be chapters total because it groups it. So we've got the arc and the chapter count. And now what we want to do is start setting up some of those AI prompts that we're going to be using when we're creating the story and the characters. And so what we want to do is add a column called AI, and this is going to be system for the chapters. And so this is going to be the system message or the system prompt or the system settings for the AI. So we make this a template column. And I'm just going to make it this for now because I can copy the prompt I created earlier. And I'll come back and paste it here. And we don't need any replacements. So again, if you're in Loqode Masters, you can just copy and paste this in. If not, it's on screen now. You can pause it and type it out or use a screen cap, whatever you want to do. But what we're doing here is we're telling the system what it is. So here we're saying you are an expert children's book writer. You write concise, compelling, wonderful stories, blah, blah, blah. And so what we're doing at the end of this is we're telling it to respond with a JSON object in the exact format we have down here. And this is really important again, because we need to try and turn the responses that AI gives us into as a concrete format, into as concrete of a format as we can. I don't know what's going on with my articulation at the moment. So we're just saying basically the book is going to be read to children aged 0 to 3, so keep the language appropriate, etc., etc. Okay, so this is the prompt. We're going to save this, and I'm going to come back to what I created earlier, and then we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to call this the AI system for the characters. Now the reason I've split this up and I haven't asked it to create the chapters and the character descriptions all at once is because excuse me, I seem to have a frog in my throat, is because we don't want to overload it. If we give it too much to do, it's not going to give us the consistency that we want. So we're splitting this into 2 requests, and this will allow us to get much more consistent, accurate results. And so for this system, we are telling it that it's tasked with creating detailed character descriptions based on a story provided by the user in JSON format. And the story we're going to provide it with is from the previous AI system, which is going to generate the story itself. We're giving it here the exact format that it needs to use. And so we're setting all this up. We're saying use concrete language, basically. So if you task 2 separate illustrators with drawing the same image, they have enough detail that the final image will be identical. So we're really trying to force it to be descriptive in its language, to describe all of the characters. And then we're also telling it to make sure that it includes this appears in key value pair. And what we want to do is we want to say, wherever you find this character in the story in a particular chapter, put the number of the chapter here. Because when we're generating the images, we need to provide each generation with a description of the same character. So if in chapter 1 we have Whiskers the black cat, we want the prompt that we're using to generate the image to have the description of Whiskers. And then in chapter 2, if it has Whiskers and Snowy the white cat, we want both, again, Whiskers full description and Snowy's full description, so we can arm the AI with enough information to generate a consistent character. So that's what we're doing here. And there are no replacements that we're going to make at the moment. We're just setting this up as the system prompt. And so we can click save on that. So I'll just jump over to my other application. and we'll go on to the final, which is like a culmination of all this stuff. So we're going to add a column to the right. We're going to say AI. This is going to be a prompt or message, and this is for the chapters. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a template. We're going to paste this here, and this is the message that we're sending to this system chapters AI bot. So this is the prompt or the message that we're going to be sending. And here we're saying create a story based on the following information. And this will be dynamically replaced with a whole bunch of values. So once you've set this up, what we need to do is copy this information here. And we can just add these placeholders. So we're going to copy this information. We can leave the age as is. You can change this in the future if you want to change it based on the type. But I'm going to copy the chapters, and we can actually remove this last one. So here we're going to set this as the story idea. We're going to set this as the story setting. We're going to add the story themes, and the chapters is going to be the chapters we looked up, or the arc that we looked up earlier. Okay, so we are looking up, or we're inserting all of this. So if we save that and we have a look at what that looks like, here's the idea. There's nothing there at the moment. Here's the setting, here's the themes, here's the age group, and then here is all of the chapters, or are all of the chapters from that chapter arc that we looked up. So this is the prompt for the chapters. And at the moment, we just need to add two placeholders for the responses. So we're going to say AI, and we are going to say this is the response from the AI for the chapters, and it's just a text column. And then we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to say this is the response for the characters that AI generates. So we've got the system prompt for the chapter generation, the system prompt for the character generation, the prompt itself, or the message for the chapter generation, and then I believe the message for the characters is just the story itself. Okay, so we've got that set up. Then what we need to do is add something called illustrations overlay, not overlay. We're going to do system illustrations overlay, and we're going to create a single value. We're going to get the first from settings image overlay. So what this is going to do is it's going to pull in that squiggly mask overlay that we're going to put on top of the images. We're going to create a new image with those two combined, and this will give us a nice soft edge to work with. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually use some complex JavaScript. So we're going to say illustrations, and this is going to be JavaScript, and we're going to use the experimental code JavaScript column. Sorry, this is going to be a template column. Actually, we can use the template column, and we're going to paste this here, and there's going to be some replacements, but for now I'll just explain very briefly what this does. So like I was saying earlier, we have 9 chapters, and in each chapter there's going to be a character. What this JavaScript does is for each chapter, it combines the description of the chapter, the description of the illustration that we need to use in order to generate the image, and it combines it with the descriptions of the characters themselves. So it's a little bit confusing, but you'll see it as we build this out. What this will do is combine the two into a nice prompt for each image that includes a description of the background and the actual overall scene, and then detailed description of the characters that are in that scene. And that's what's going to give us a little bit more consistency when we're generating the images. So for now, we can leave this as is, and we do need to add some replacements, although we haven't created those columns yet. But let's do it anyway, because then we can come back and just update this. So there's 5 different replacements we need to make. The first is the chapters. The second is the characters. The third is the endpoint. The fourth is the overlay image itself. And then the final one is the trigger. So the endpoint and the trigger is going to come from the model that we'll look up in a moment. And the chapters is going to be this AI response. The characters is going to be the AI response for the characters. And then the endpoint we will leave at the moment, and the overlay we can set as the illustrations overlay. Okay, so again, what this JavaScript is going to do, and this just saves us, I can't even tell you how many columns this saves. This saves us entire tables because we don't need a helper table for this particular part. And there's also some other improvements I've made where we don't need a helper table at all for this project. But what this does, just to recap, is it gets the chapters, it gets the characters, and it says, based on the appears in, it creates a little chapter, an array of chapter descriptions that has a description of the illustration along with a description of the characters in that illustration. And that's what we send off to generate the image. And that allows us to get really consistent, nice results. So we leave this as is for now, and we can continue building. What we can do is we can actually add a JavaScript column next to this, add a column to the right, and we can say illustrations, and this is what's actually going to run that code. And so we're going to make it a experimental code JavaScript, and the code that we want to run is the JavaScript that we created before. Now it's going to come up with an error because we didn't fill in all of those fields, but that's fine. Let's add it now, click save, and when we update the template, this will not have an error anymore. So now that we've done that, what we need to do is add a new column. It's going to be step current, and we're going to make it, I believe, a number column, a basic number, and we're going to make it user specific, and we're going to make it an integer, and we don't need a group separator. And so what this is going to do is it's going to allow us, I'm just going to check if it is user specific. No, it's not. Okay. So we duplicate that. We don't make it user specific, and we delete the incorrect. So what this is going to do, it's going to allow the user to actually progress and update the current step that they're on as they click next and back and that sort of stuff. And we're just going to increment the number here. It'll start off as 0 and continue up until about 3, which means they're on the final review and download page. So once we've done that, we need to add a column to the right. And this is where we're going to actually look up via relation. We're going to create a relation, and we're going to find the step that matches our current step. So we're going to match the step current to the step number. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to display on screen, depending on what step we're on, different titles, subtitles, that sort of thing. And this actually allows us to minimize the number of components we have to add to the layout. If we can do it on the back end, we should, because it centralizes all of the logic and allows us to progress and manage the front end much easier. So once we've done that, we're going to add a column to the right, and this is going to be the step title. And we'll add a lookup of the step title, and we save it. And we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to look up the subtitle. There we go. So we've got the current step that the user is on. We've got the chapter that is, or the step that is related to this. We've got the title, and we've got the subtitle. Then what we want to do is we need to add a query. And the reason we do a query is because we can sort them. So we're going to add a steps all, or we can call it related, but we can leave it as steps all. And we're going to query the steps table, and we're going to sort by number ascending. So we're creating this relation here, and this is steps all. And you can see, we'll see the 3 steps. Okay, so we've related that. What we want to do next is add a column to the right, and this is going to be steps name, or names. In fact, we can call it list. And this is what's actually going to feed into our progress bar component, or a step, progress steps component, whatever you want to call it. And all we're going to do here is create a joined list of the steps name. And we can just leave it separated by this comma. And what we have now are the names of each step, which is going to appear in our progressive step progress bar. I still don't know what to call it. And so what we're going to do is, I'm just going to check what this column here is. Find uses. Okay, so we need to add this column for a number of reasons. Okay, so we're going to add a column to the right. This is going to be steps count, and we're going to count how many steps there are in total. So what am I doing? Roll up of the steps, and we can just count the step name. Doesn't really matter. All we need is the number of total steps. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a math column, and this is going to be steps final step. Now, if you remember, we started at 0, so the final step is actually going to be 1 less than the total. So we just add a math column, and this is the total minus 1. And the total, well, it should be count actually. Let's be a little bit more consistent. And this is going to be steps count, which it already is, minus 1. We'll make it an integer, and then we're good to go. So we've got the total number of steps and then the final step. And we're using this for conditional visibility rules on the front end. So if they're on the final step, show a certain thing. That's all it is. Then we need to add a column called model ID, and this is where they're going to paste the ID of the model that they're actually have selected. So if we go to train models, and I just copy, for example, Aristocats, and we go back to stories, and we paste it here. I'll just expand this a little bit. What we can do now is, next to this, we can look up the model. So add a column to the right, it's going to be model/related, and we're going to select a relation column where the model ID matches the train model's row ID. Okay, so we're looking up the model that we've selected, and the reason we're doing this is so we can get that endpoint and that trigger. So here we're going to say model endpoint, and we'll just make sure we're spelling this correctly. And we're going to look up from the model the endpoint, and we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to look up the trigger word. So we look up the model trigger of this model. So we have the trigger and the endpoint. That's it for the model. Then what we need to do is we need to actually look up some of the chapters, but we haven't created that table yet. Yeah, we're going to skip this for now, and we're going to move on to the progress bar. Okay, so here we're going to say progress, and this is going to be the progress of AI, the chapters. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to provide a little bit more insight to the end user as to what's actually going on. So we're going to use a if then else, and we're going to say if the response chapters is not empty, then means we have a value, and we're going to set that as 1. Else, we're going to set that as 0. So you can see that at the moment we have no response from AI. If it was to generate something, then we have 1, and we'll be able to add other numbers to this to increase the progress. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. So I'm just going to go over here and remove this. We can duplicate this, and we can make this the characters. And so I'm going to say, okay, I'll do the same thing, and we're going to check if the characters is not empty, and we're going to save that. Then the next couple of ones are essentially based on the chapter table, which we have not created yet. So I'm just going to check the best next step in terms of the chapters. So we have thumbnails, HTML and PDF, and the plugin. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the chapters table, excuse me. And we're going to set that up so we can come back into the stories table and add some information related to the chapters here in this table. So I'll see you in that video. Okay, so let's get on to the chapters table. So we're going to make this another sub table of stories. And we use this, and we say chapters, and we drag it underneath stories. And of course we add the row ID column. And then what we're going to do is we're going to edit this, and we're going to say story ID. And so what we're going to do is we're going to relate these chapters to the story based on the ID. So we can do that right now. And then we need to add a column to the right, and we're going to say story related. And we're going to actually establish that relation between the story ID and the story's row ID. So you can see it's already found that match. And then what we need to do is add a column to the right, and we're going to look up the chapters of the story. So we're going to find the lookup. We're going to look up the AI response chapters. And so what this will do, and in fact what I'm going to do is actually copy an existing response, and I can give you this response as well so you can actually figure something to see the values populate on screen. But what I'm going to do is just copy some previous values just so we see stuff populating. So I'm just going to paste some stuff here. And this is the chapters that AI generated in a previous run. And these are the characters, okay? So if you're not in Loqode Masters, you don't need to do this. This is just to help visually see what's actually going on. Because now if we go back to chapters, we can see that it's actually pulled in the chapters. And that's what we want. We want to actually be able to see the chapters and extract information from them. So then what we're going to do is we're going to add a column to the right, and this is going to be chapter editing, and this is going to be a Boolean, and this is just going to allow the users to actually edit the chapter. Maybe they want to change a word here or there. This is just going to allow us to visually hide and show certain elements on the front end if they're editing or if they're not editing. So once we've done that, what we need to do is create a query, and what'll happen is if we add a column to the right here and we say chapter, we're going to add a column called number, and this is going to be a chapter number, obviously. And when we create the actions that add rows, or the action that adds rows to this table, we're going to have chapter number 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 8. So 0 to 8 is 9 chapters. And the reason we need that is because out of these chapters, we need to extract certain chapters individually. So we'll add a column here and say chapter query, and it's going to be a template, and we're going to say chapters, and this is going to be X. Okay, and we're going to replace X with the chapter number. So we save that, or we enter it, and then what we can do is we can, I'm just copying something, we can then from this response we can start extracting information. So if we add a column to the right and say chapter title, and we can go to integrations, JSON, query JSON, and we're going to query the story chapters, and the query is going to be the chapters query. So in fact, this needs to be the isolated, not the title, because what we're doing is, you can see here we're getting chapter 0, and so it's only returning chapter 0 based on this out of all of this. Okay, so we're getting chapter 0 and we're isolating it, and then from that isolated we can get the chapter title, and so it's going to be another JSON query, and we're going to query the isolated, and we're going to get the title. So here you can say Whiskers, you can see it says Whiskers Joyful Leap. We duplicate this and we're going to get the content as well. Content. And then you can see that it's extracted the content and the title from this, which is extracted from this. So this is usually what you would see in a helper table, but we've actually skipped that because we don't need it, because we're going to be creating the rows themselves that allow us to have this index number and look up stuff and all of that. And then what we need to do is add a column to the right here, and we can say chapter actual. And what this is going to do is it's going to be a JavaScript column. And this is what I was copying before. And we're going to return P1 plus 1. And so we're going to return the number plus 1. So if the number is 0, the actual chapter number is going to be chapter 1. And we have to do this because in the appears in for these characters, right, if we find these characters, it's going to say appears in 1, 2, 3, etc., not 0 up to 8. And so this is what we're doing. We're just giving ourselves the flexibility to actually properly look up who's in this chapter. So back in the chapters table, now that we've got the actual, we can add a column to the right here, and we can say chapter title, and this is just going to be a text column, and we're going to be able to either use the pre-generated title of the chapter or our own. And this is the same for the content. I'm going to save that. And we don't need the next column. So I'm just going to remove this. Then what we need to do is create something called illustration array. And this is just going to be a text column. And the reason we're adding this is because if you remember, in the settings, we had this issue where triggering this on and off could possibly trigger additional calls. And the same applies for all of the information related to the stories and the chapters. If it's dynamic, which can be a good thing, but if it's dynamic in this case, and anything changes, it's going to fire off at minimum 9 additional updates and possibly more. And so what we're going to do here is this JavaScript that we created, that's now working because we filled in these values. This JavaScript is going to give us a beautiful response that includes the characters and their description in the illustration prompt. So again, a little bit confusing, but you'll see why we do this. So what's going to happen is, in fact, I can update. If you remember, we had these endpoint and trigger. If I update this to the model endpoint and the model trigger, and I save, you can see now we've got all the information we need to actually generate an image. We've got the endpoint, we've got the trigger word, we've got the setting, and we've got the characters that are in that setting. And then we have the overlay image itself. And it does this for every chapter. So what we've done now is we've created an array of really descriptive, in-depth illustration prompts that include the trigger word. They have the endpoint for the specific model we're going to be using. It includes all the information we need. So what will happen is this, when we add these rows, will be pasted over here to be used in the image generation itself. And what's really important to note about this is that because this is static, if we ever changed information accidentally, or we updated the system prompt, or we did whatever, it won't re-trigger the image generation for every row in this table. So that's quite important to point out. So now that we've added that, we need to add a template column. And the template column is going to be the illustration query. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a template, and X in this case is going to be replaced by the chapter number, not the actual, just the number. And so what we can do now is we can add a column to the right, and we can say illustration. And this is going to be the body of the request that we're going to be sending out. So we get JSON, query JSON. We're going to query this array, and the query we're going to use is the query template column. So when I save this, what you'll see is this is the body of the API call we're going to use to generate an image for chapter 1, and it includes the endpoint, the trigger word, the setting, the characters, and the overlay for that specific chapter. And so if I added a new chapter, and this was now 1, it would get the second chapter's API body. So that's important to do. And then what we need to do after that is add actually an API call column. So this is going to be illustration response. Oh my gosh, can I spell response? And so what we're going to do here, and it won't work now because we haven't set up the endpoints properly, but if I go to call API, and you can use Trigger Webhook, so if you don't have access to call API, you can use Trigger Webhook. It's a little bit less straightforward, but perfectly doable. And the endpoint is going to be coming from the user table. We haven't set that up yet, but we can set everything else up, and we can make it a post request, and we can add some headers, and we can say content type is going to be secret, but it's not really secret because we're just going to type application/JSON. And for this example, I'm not using authenticated calls to N8N in this example, but again, if you were, you could use authorization, bearer, and then the key, and that would secure this API call. But for the body of the request, we're going to use the illustration body. Okay, so this is actually set up besides the endpoint, which we need to get from the user table. So I'm going to save that, and I'll continue doing this, and then we'll update it once we've added that column to the user table. Then what we need to do is add a column to the right, and this is going to be illustration / regenerated. And this allows us to regenerate the image if we don't like it. And the reason we add this is because this column here, as the chapters get automatically added to this table, the images will be automatically generated concurrently, not sequentially. So when we add 9 chapters, 9 images are going to be generated at the same time, which is much quicker than 1 at a time. But if we want to regenerate them, then we have the option to do that through an action, and the result will be pasted here, and then we can choose what we want from there. And then what we need to do is we need to just add some display properties. So here we're going to say display, and this is going to be the title. And we're going to say if chapter text column title is not empty, then use the title that they've actually typed in. Otherwise, use the title of the chapter that AI generated. So you can see that because we haven't got anything here, it's got whiskers. If I put 1, 2, 3, that would be the new title of the chapter. So that's the first one. The second one, we duplicate this and we do the same for the content, and we just change this to the content. So we say that should actually be this. So we say if the content is not empty, use the user generated content, otherwise use the automatic content, which is just the chapter text itself. And we save that. Then what we need to do is repeat this, we duplicate this, and this is for the illustration itself. And so we're going to say if illustration regenerated is not empty, then use the regenerated. Otherwise, use the response that is created on the initial generation of the chapter. And we can save that. And I'll just check that that is correct. So there's a few more things we have to do actually. And what we need to do is just add one more step. And we need to say here, if the illustration response doesn't include the word data, then show a loading GIF. And so what this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, while the image is not present, the automatically generated image, while that's not present, show a loading GIF. But as soon as that is present, show the response. So it's a little confusing, but you'll see what that means. We're saying if a regenerated image is present, show that. If the response doesn't include data, which means it hasn't been generated yet, show the loading. And if it does include data, or in all other cases, show the actual image response. So we save that. And then we have a few more columns here. And by few more, I mean one. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a column to the right, and this is going to be summary HTML. And this is what we're actually going to use in the PDF itself that we're generating. So this is going to be a template column. And we're going to copy this chapter illustration. We're going to copy the chapter content, and we're going to make this a illustration and the content. Now I've left another one here because you may want to add the title of the chapter to the book. It's not necessary in this case. And so even the editing that we're doing is not really going to reflect in the final product, but you can add a chapter title, or if you want to add a contents page, you can use the chapter titles for that. But for now, we don't actually need that because there's only two variables here that we're replacing. So we can actually save this. And I'm just going to check that we've got all of the columns that we need before we move on. And I think we're actually good to go. So this is the chapters done. Again, you may need to paste some of these values in the stories table and stuff like that just to see the information reflected, but you don't actually have to. You can set this up without having any of that data present because we're in the setup process. So what we're going to do now is just very quickly go to the users table and pull in that information that we needed before, so we can actually use it in that template column or whatever we were using it for. So what we're going to do is we're going to say illustration. This is going to be N8N image endpoint. And we're going to make this a single value. We're going to get the first from settings N8N image endpoint. So you can see it's not correct, but it is in a way. And for now, that's all we have to do. We come back here, and I believe we were using it in this column, and it's going to come up with an error, but that's fine. That's what we need. So there we go. Let's move on to the last step of the stories table and the user table, and then we can get on to actually creating these endpoints and the layout screen. So let's jump into the stories table and add a few of the columns that we couldn't add before because the chapters table did not exist. So the first one we're going to do is in the stories, we're going to add a field next to the themes called story. And we could have added this before actually, but this is okay. This is going to be story title default. And so we're going to have a default story title that is going to query some JSON. We're going to query the AI response for the title. Okay, so this is going to get the title of the book in case the user doesn't set their own title. So we add this as well. So if the user has set a title, we use that title. Otherwise, we use the default title that we have here. So we've done that. So what we need to do is scroll across to after the model, and we can add some more columns here. So we're going to add a column to the right. This is going to be chapters/related. And we're going to use a relation column, I believe. Yeah, relation column where the row ID of the current story matches the chapter story ID. And we're going to match multiple. So it's going to pull in all of the related chapters. At the moment, we only have one, which is fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a column to the right. I'm going to say chapters total. And this is the total number of chapters that we've generated. So we're going to roll up by summarizing. We can just count the row IDs. And you can see here that we've only actually generated one chapter. The last thing we need to do is add a column to the right, and we're going to get chapters HTML. And this is that summary HTML. And it's not a lookup, sorry, it's a joined list. This is that summary HTML that we created in the previous one. And I believe we're just going to separate it by a space. So let me just check that that is what it is. Yep. So what we're doing is we're now joining all of the HTML, which has the image that we've generated and the content of the chapter itself in a HTML element, and then beneath this will be chapter 2, and beneath it will be chapter 3, so on and so forth. So then we need to begin updating this progress bar. So we've got the AI chapters, which will add a value of 1 to the total if it's generated. Characters will add a value of 1 again if the characters are generated. And then what we need to do is do a little bit of math. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to add a column to the right, and I'm going to make it a math column. And I'm going to start with 1 because I want to show an initial amount of progress. So the loading bar will show maybe 10% or whatever it is. And this is just so that while the chapters is generating, there's still some semblance of loading going on in terms of the progress. So this is going to be 1 plus chapters, and this is going to be that progress chapters, plus characters, which is going to be progress characters, plus the count, which is going to be the count of the chapters. So we save that and we make it an integer. And just for consistency, I'm going to rename this to count so you know what you're actually selecting. So you can see here, now the total is 4. And we need to name this. So we'll say progress. What did I call this? Current progress. This is just for the loading. This isn't for the progress bar. You'll see. I know it sounds a little abstract because we're not building out the layout, but when you build a big project like this, honestly, most of it is just tinkering back and forth, bit of this table, bit of that table. Oh, I need this information, so on and so forth. So it's actually quite hard to do a tutorial in a linear fashion because building an app is not linear. It's a network. It's a neural network. So we can save that anyway. And then what we need to do is create a total. And what this is going to be is we're going to add a column to the right. And this is going to be progress. Okay, my keyboard doesn't want to work. There we go. Progress total. And we're going to make it a math column again. And we're going to use the number 3 because we're adding 1 by default. And then we've got the chapters value, which is 1 if it's present, and the characters value. And so that's 3. And we're going to add that to the total chapters defined by our arc. So the total here is going to be type chapter count. Okay. So you can see here that we've completed 4 out of 12. So that would be 4 divided by 12% of this story is complete in terms of AI generation. So I know it's a little confusing again, but what's going to happen is as chapters are added to this table, this is going to increase. So they'll see the loading bar increase as it approaches the total, which is 12. So this is not necessary, but it's from a user experience perspective, it's a massive improvement, because if this didn't exist, they wouldn't have any visual indicator that, okay, there's actually something progressing and churning away in the background. So it is quite important. And then what we need to do is we need to add another math column that is going to just give us basically a percentage. So we add a column to the right, and this is going to be progress percent. And it's going to be current divided by total times 100. So we just want to make sure that this is progress current divided by progress total times 100. And we save that. So you can see that the current progress is 33%. And then the last thing is we need to add some HTML that allows us to actually display. So, I mean, we really should call it loading bar instead of progress, just for clarity. But at the moment, we'll stick with this. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the width of that loading bar to the percent. So we go progress percent. And so what's going to happen is at 33%, the loading bar is going to be 33% complete. And at 100%, it'll be 100% complete. So this is where we're getting that visual indication of everything that's going on. Now what we want to do is I'm just going to check what's going on here. So we need to set some values for thumbnails, default thumbnails for the story and that sort of stuff. So here we're going to say thumbnail, sorry, that should be thumbnail default. And we're going to get a single value. We're going to get the first from the chapter's display illustration. So what that's going to do is it's going to pull in the first chapter's image as the default thumbnail for the story. And then we can duplicate this and we can say selected. So what's going to happen is when they actually select one, we're going to put the URL of that thumbnail here. And then we need, finally, we need a thumbnail display. And we're going to use an if then else, like we have previously, to say, okay, if they've selected one, if it's not empty, use the one they've selected. Otherwise, just use the default thumbnail. So we can save that. Now what we want to do is actually create the HTML for the story itself for the picture book. So here we're going to say PDF HTML, and we're going to make it a template. And what we're going to do here, you don't really need to worry about this stuff. We can change this title. I'm just going to change this to picture book. You don't need to do this, but this code will be below, just like all of the other code. And if you're watching this and you're not in Loqode Masters, you can just pause at various points and get the code, or you can use this OCR or whatever you want. But we need to replace a few values here. The first one we need to replace is the cover image. And we're going to set this as thumbnail display. Then we need to replace the title of the book. And we're going to replace this with that title. And then we need to, we're going to replace it with the user-generated title, because the automatic title is going to be copied over to that. So there will be a value there. We don't necessarily need that if then else at the moment. And then the last one is the chapters themselves. And this is going to be the chapters HTML. So when we save this, this is going to be filled out with all the information that we need to actually generate the picture book. And the last thing is we add a PDF, and we can call this URL or plugin. And what we're going to do is, I'm just going to check the layout. What we need to do here is add an experimental code column. And we're going to use HTML to PDF. We're going to use the Loqode PDF generator. And we're going to set the HTML as the PDF HTML. The file name can be the story title. We don't have to set this, but we can for now. The format, I don't think we need to touch, but the orientation, we can set this as landscape. We want no margin. We want high fidelity. And we want to set some custom dimensions, because we're going to generate the images in custom dimensions. So the custom dimensions is going to be 1024 by 768. And we want to break the page after .break class. Okay, so if we save this, what you'll notice is that in the chapters in the HTML, we've added a class called break, and what that's going to do is it's going to split all of the chapters into separate pages. So after the HTML identifies a class, or the plugin identifies a class called break, after that element, it's going to split to a new page. So that's what that means there. So I'm just going to check. I think we're good for the stories table, and I believe we are good to go. There is one last thing, which is the user table. So we may as well do that now. Let's not go to the next video for that. Let's just set that up now. So the first thing we're going to do is, when we're creating a new story, we just want to set this as silently in the background when we're submitting the form. We just want to say that the first step is going to be 0. We don't actually need to do anything else there. So for every new story, the first step that they're going to be taken to is step 0. And then what we want to do is add a column to the right, and we're going to say story current. And this is going to be just a text column where we're going to save the current ID of the story that we're editing. And the last one is story/related. So we can actually find a relation based on the story using the row ID. So I'll save this and I'll go to stories and I'll copy this and paste it here, and you can see that it's pulled in the story itself. So as far as I'm concerned, that is the backend done. I know there was a few complex things there, but this is an advanced tutorial. There's no way around it. And the end result is very, very cool. And I think it's going to push your skills to the limit. So let's get on to the actions and the layout next. And then we can continue. In fact, I think we might get on to the endpoint next. I don't know. We'll see. I'll see you in the next video. Okay, so before we actually get on to the webhook and the image generation itself, we're going to build out the actions, and then we'll get on to the layout. I just think that's a better progression. And like I said, realistically, you would be doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, kind of all over the place. I'm sure you already know how building apps works. It's never so linear, but what we can do is begin building out some of these workflows, these actions, and then we can get on to the other stuff. So we're going to create a new workflow. It's going to be an app interaction, and we're going to call this one story, create new story. And it's going to be an interaction with the stories table. Okay. First thing we're going to do is set a condition. And this is because we want to make sure that in the future, we can have different models with different numbers of chapters. So I'm going to copy this ID of the basic picture book, come back here, and we're going to set a condition, and we're going to make sure that the type ID is that row ID. And just so we know what's going on, we're going to rename this, and we're going to say basic picture book 9 chapters. Okay, so we're going to say only do this if it's the picture book with 9 chapters. The reason is because we're actually just going to add 9 add row actions instead of having to do an API call. You can of course do an API call. It doesn't matter, but it will probably be quicker actually if you did an API call, but I'm just going to show you that it's actually possible to add multiple bulk rows using an action. And it can be beneficial in some ways and slower in others. But what we're going to do first is we're going to set the story ID, set column values for the user profile row, and we're just going to set it as the row ID of the story. So we're going to set that up. Next thing we're going to do is show the detail screen for this item. So this is going to be triggered after we add a new story. And so we're going to show it, I believe we're going to show it as the main. So we'll show this as main for this item, and that's good to go. Now, really we should be naming these, but for brevity's sake, I'm just going to continue to add the actions. So the next thing we need to do is we need to call OpenAI, and we need to complete a chat. So I'm going to add this. Okay, so I've added my API key. I'm going to click done. And now we've set this up. Now what we want to do is configure it to use the system and the message prompts that we created earlier. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select AI system for chapters, because this is going to be generating the chapters. And the message is going to be AI prompt for the chapters. And we're going to use GPT-4o. We don't need to change the image, but what we do need to do is make it a JSON output and make the maximum 16,000. Now it can actually go higher, but not with glide's limitations at the moment, I think. But it doesn't matter. 16,000 is plenty for a chapter picture book. And here we're going to put the response into the response chapters category. So that's all we need to do for this one. Then we need to do another call, and that's going to be another OpenAI action, complete chat. Here we're going to use the AI system prompt for the characters, and the message we're going to feed it is going to be the response of the chapters. So we're going to feed the chapters into the character generation API call, and we'll make this 4.0, and we'll do the same thing here. We want it as JSON, and we want this to be 16,000, and the response here is going to go to the response characters. Now, once we've done that, we want to wait a little bit. So we're going to wait for a condition, and we're going to wait. I'll just put a little thing, and we're going to say generating title. And this is just to make sure that when we copy the default title into the title, that it's actually present. So we're going to say wait till it's not empty. This hasn't been working for some reason. I'm not sure if it's anything to do with the JSON column itself, but that's what we need to do. And then what we're going to do is set some values, and we're going to set the story title as the story default title. So we can then edit what the AI generated as the title. And then we're going to wait for the illustrations array. So we're going to do another wait, and we're going to wait for up to 3 seconds. And we'll use this little ball, and we're going to say generating chapter images. And what we're going to wait for is the illustrations array includes the word endpoint. The reason we're waiting for the word endpoint is because in the data, the JavaScript might come up with an error, or it might come up with something weird. And so we don't want to wait till it's not empty, because it might actually have something, but it might be wrong. So we want to wait until we see this word, endpoint, and we know that the JavaScript has run correctly. So we're going to wait until that's done. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a row to the chapters, and we're going to set the story ID as the current story from our user profile. So we're going to say story current, and the illustrations array is going to be that illustrations array that the JavaScript creates. So I'm just going to check if there's any other values, and we need to set the chapter number as 0. So what we're going to do, and we're just going to repeat this, what it's going to do is it's going to add a row with chapter 0. It will then extract out of that illustration array the first illustration body, and then it'll do it for the second for number 1, the third for number 2, so on and so forth. And so we literally just repeat this. We duplicate it, and we make this chapter 1, and we duplicate this, and we make it chapter 2, and we duplicate this, and we make it chapter 3, duplicate 4, duplicate 5, duplicate duplicate 6, duplicate 7, and then the final is we're duplicating the 8. So that's from 0 to 8 is 9 chapters. And that's why we want to make sure that this is the arc with 9 chapters, because we may have one with a different amount of chapters. So now that we've set that up, we're actually done for this particular action. So let's move on to the next action. So we're going to add an app interaction. And this one, we're going to allow them to regenerate the story. So if they don't like the story, they can regenerate it. So we're going to story regenerate. And it's going to be very similar. So in fact, what we can do is we can duplicate this and rename it. So we're going to say story. Right. We need to get this story. And this is going to be regenerate story. And what we need to do is basically we need to delete from the story all of the related chapters. So it's going to delete quite a few at once. And then we need to, in the current story, we need to clear some values for the current story. And we need to clear this response and this response. I don't think we need to do anything else, because what that's going to do is it's going to cycle through that same thing. So you can see how you might want to add some naming conventions here. But again, for brevity's sake, we're going to leave it at that. So we've duplicated it, added the delete, and changed this to regenerate. We're going to add another action. It's going to be story view. And what we want to do is just set this as the stories table. And then we're going to set some values for the user profile. Set column values, and we're going to set for the user profile row the story current as the row ID of the story. And then we're going to show a detail screen for the story as a main overlay. And then there's one last action, which is the ability to edit the chapters. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a condition, and we're going to say if the, we need to change this actually. This needs to be related to chapters. And we need to say if the story, chapter, sorry, going nuts. If the chapter title is empty, then what we want to do is we want to set the chapter title as the default and as the content. Okay, so what's going to happen is if they haven't added their own chapter title, it means this is empty. So when they click the edit button, we're going to copy the defaults, put them there in the editable fields so they can actually edit them. And so that's all we need to do for that. And we're going to add an else branch. And we're going to, there's one more thing here. Sorry, we need to say the chapter editing is true. And then here, what we're going to do is set some column values, and we're just going to set the editing as true. So that's actually all we need to do for the actions. Now let's get onto the layout. Okay, so onto the layout screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you the pre-built version, just so we don't have to fiddle around with setting up all of the information. I'll go step by step, so nothing will be missed. But I think it's just more efficient to do it this way rather than have to build it out. It would take over an hour, and this will probably take an hour anyway. So let's get into it. What you want to do is add a new page, and the source of this page can be users. We're going to call it stories. It's going to be a custom page, and for the visibility, we don't need to touch anything there. Then we're going to add a card collection component. So we add a card collection. And once we've added that, we set the source as stories. We title it something like My Stories. We leave it as card. The title of the card item is going to be the story title default or the title. Okay, so you can pick if you want it to be the default title or the user's title. The description is going to be the story idea. And so this is just reference for the person who created it. And the image is going to be the display thumbnail. Okay, so we can change that to the display thumbnail. The design is going to be, in terms of style, it's going to be card. We can make it extra large. We can make the image style square, fill, and vertical. Page size doesn't really matter at this point. In the options, we can just leave it as is, and you can toggle on or off the search. We don't actually need it. There probably won't be that many stories. And then in the actions, the title bar action, we're going to name it Create New Story. And if you don't have access to this, you need to enable advanced actions. So if I click this, hopefully I can undo that. But you need to click Enable Workflows, and then you'll be presented with this screen. And so for the title bar action, it's going to be Create New Story. And what we're going to do is show a form screen as a slide in, and then we can configure that up. So before we do that, let's just set this item click. We're going to set this item click. So when we click this item, it's going to be that workflows story view. So once you've done that and we've got the button on screen, we can then open this form and set it up as we want. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the destination as stories. And in the options, we're going to title it Create New Story. On Submit, we're going to use the workflows Create New Story workflow or action that we created before. So we're just going to set that, and we don't need to touch it because it's actually already done. So we've set that up. Then for the components themselves, the first thing is we want to add a silent value from the user profile. It's going to be the story first step. We're going to click this, and we're going to assign it to the step current. So the first step that we see when we open this is going to be step 0. Once you've done that, then we can begin adding the other fields. So we can add a container. We're going to add a container. And we're going to, in that container, and you might see some values here, some pre-existing values, you can just remove them. But in that container, we're going to add a choice component. So this one here, we're going to add a choice component. We're going to be writing to the type ID, and the default value is going to be this default value here, which is the only type that we currently have. The source is going to be types, the value is going to be row ID, and we're going to display it as the name of the type, and the label is going to be story type, and we're going to make it required. And for options, we don't actually need to touch that. Then for the model ID, we're going to write to the model ID of the story. We don't need to set a default value. The source is going to be the trained models table, and we're going to be writing the row ID as the value. The image is going to be the thumbnail. So if you see here, we can see these little thumbnails. And we're going to display it as the name, the model name. And you just want to make sure that you're renaming the labels. So we're saying illustration style, same for the story type. And we're going to make it required. Then we just have a general text entry where we're saying, here's where you can write some information about the story. And we can do like a placeholder. And this is going to be writing to the story idea. And this is again required. We're going to have the story location or the setting. So we're going to be writing this text entry component to the story setting, and the label is going to be story location, and we can just name it how we want, and we make it required. And we don't need any options, just like the other ones. And the last one is a choice component. We're going to be writing to the themes. The source is going to be the themes table. The values is going to be the theme name. This is one of the few instances where we don't write the ID, we write the actual name. And we're going to display it as the name. And the label is going to be story themes. We're going to make it required, but we're going to allow selecting of multiple. And here you can say how many themes you want them to be able to select. So I've set a maximum of 5, but that's totally up to you. And we don't need to touch anything for the options. So what's going to happen is that when we click this, it's going to create a new item. Now at the moment, because we haven't set up the endpoints and all of that, it won't work correctly. And so we need to bear that in mind, that when we submit, it's not actually going to generate, it will generate the story and the chapters, just not the images. So what you can do is you can go ahead and fill this out, and we can generate something that we can then edit, and then you'll be able to change the values of the layout screen. Okay, so once you've done that, you should have already a kind of dummy value here. It won't show the image, but you should be able to click into it. And so once you click in, this is where we're going to set up all of the other values. And what I'm going to do is just zoom out just slightly so we have the layout a little bit more easy to read. So we've clicked into the details, and what that's done is it triggered that action where we put the story ID in our user table. And then we're going to add a few components here, and it's actually all one page. So we're on the last step of the layout, believe it or not. So for the header component, we're going to add a container, and we're going to make it a 2-to-1 container that is a highlight background. And for the options, we're going to show this component when the step/current is equal to or less than the step's final. Okay, because we only want to show this if they're on a step other than if they're on a step that is within the number of steps. Hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to set the step current less or equal to the step final. And then within this container, I've added a separator, small separator without the line, just to space it a little bit down from the top. And then we have a title component. And this title component is a simple title component. So it's this one here. And we're setting the title as the step title. We're setting the subtitle as the step subtitle. We've made it compact, and we've added a bit of fill for the image, even though we're not using one, but you could associate an image with the step. And then for the options, we don't have anything there. Then we've added a button block to the right-hand side of this 2-to-1 container. And this button is going to be a basic style. We're going to make it wide. We're going to align it. We're going to set the accent to the right, and we're going to show the labels. And what we're going to do is we're going to have this button, this first button. It's going to be back with an arrow on the left-hand side. And the action here is just going to be navigation, go back. And we're only going to allow this when the current step equals 0. So if they're on the first step of this entire process, it's actually going to take them back out of the details, back to this home screen. So if we click into it, That's the first button. The second button is going to be exactly the same in terms of the button title, but now we're going to increment a number. We're going to increment a number for this item. It's going to be the step current, and we're going to increment it by -1. Okay, so if we go to a next step and I click this, it's going to reduce the current step by 1, which takes us back based on the visibility that we will set up after. And so we only want to allow this when the current step is greater than 0. Because if we had it any other way, it would essentially appear on the first step, and it would decrement the current step to like -1. So we don't really want to do that. Then we want to add a next button with an arrow on the right hand side. And this is going to increment a number. We're going to be incrementing the current step by +1. And we only want to allow this when the current step is less than the final step. So on the final step, we don't want to be able to increment it by 1 because we're going to have a different button that's going to take care of that. And then finally, if I can reduce it, we're going to have another button here that is titled Confirm and Create. And we're going to increment a number. The number we're incrementing is the current step by 1. But what we're doing is we're just changing the title and the icon. And we're going to allow this action when the current step is the final step. So on the final step, they're going to be able to click this Confirm and Create, which increments the current step by 1, which takes them to the confirmation final screen, which is not a final screen. It's actually just conditional visibility on the front end here. So that's actually all we need to do for this button. Then we can get on to the next container. And this container is just a general container that is full, and we've set it as the highlight. And what we're going to do is we're going to show this component when the current step, in fact, I don't think we need this. I may be wrong, but I don't think we need that. So actually all we need to do is add this container. Actually we do, my bad, we do. We do need that. So we need to hide, because there's a separate container. I thought it was within the container, we don't. So we need to hide it when it's less or equal to the final step. Okay, so we're going to hide this container when it's less or equal, just like we're doing here. And so this is also going to be a highlight, and in this we're going to insert a rich text component, and the content of this rich text component is going to be the steps progress indicator. Okay, so this is that plugin that we've created, and that will render this button that changes as we go forward and back. Once we've done that, we're going to add an element that is not going to be visible at the moment. What I can do is just change this to equals. And this is going to show, while the chapters are generating, it's going to show the fact that it's loading and we're generating chapters, and it's going to have this beautiful loading bar that will increase or decrease based on the amount of chapters that we've created. So you can see here that this title component, well, first of all, let's start with the container. We've got a full container as a card, and we're displaying this when the chapter count doesn't equal the type chapters total, okay? But I'm showing it now so we can edit it. And so in this container, we're going to add a title component. So this is just a simple title. And the title is going to be, we're generating your chapters. The subtitle is going to be, please wait a moment. And the image is just going to be an image. It's whatever loading image you want. In this case, I'm just using this like AI orb. But we've just set this general loading image as the image. And we don't actually need to change anything there. But the next thing we need to do is add a rich text component to this container. And we're going to set this, the content of this rich text component, as the progress loading bar. So this is that loading bar that we created on the back end. And what's going to happen is that it's going to start at about here, because we set the default, the lowest value to 1, because we're saying 1 plus everything else. And it's going to slowly increase as the chapters and the images are generated. And once this is all generated, this component itself, this container, is going to hide. So that's all we need to do for that. I'm going to set this back as the correct value. And then we get on to the next component, which is a custom collection. So in this custom collection, we're going to set the source as the chapters related from the story. So these are all the related chapters of the story. The layout is going to be a 1 to 2. The title style will be simple and the background will be card. And then for the options, we want to show this component when the step current, or the current step, is equal to 0 and the total amount of chapters generated is greater than 0. Okay, so this count column is counting how many related chapters there are. So as soon as there's a related chapter, it's going to show on screen and we're going to start to see the chapters populate as that runs through that action where we're adding chapter 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's how that works. You need to make sure that that's set up correctly. And we're going to sort by the chapter actual or the chapter number as ascending, okay? Because we want it in obviously chronological order. And then for the actions, we don't actually need to touch anything there. So we've got this custom collection, we've set this up, and now we need to start adding some elements to this custom collection. So the first one is going to be some text. And so we're going to add, we just added this custom collection. Now we're going to add some text. And the text we're going to add is the display/title. Okay, so it's display title for the chapter. And we're going to set it as a headline medium. For the options, we're only going to show this if chapter editing is not checked. So if they're not editing it, we're going to show this static value. If they are editing it, it will be hidden. Okay, so that's what that is for. So that was just an example. You haven't added these buttons yet, but that's an example. So we've added the chapter title and we're going to do the same for the content of the chapter. So we're going to show this as large style and we're going to display the content. We're going to display content. And we're going to have the same visibility rules here. We're going to say when chapter editing is not checked, okay? Because we want this to be hidden and turned into an input when we're editing it. And then we add some text entry components. So we have the text entry form element. And that, just to show you, is just the chapter title as an input. Okay, so I'm going to leave that is checked. And what I'll do is I'll just set it as checked for now. So we're going to set the chapter title. And this is going to be writing to the chapter title. The label is going to be chapter title. And for the options, we're going to show this when chapter/editing is checked. Then for the chapter content, this is going to be, the column is going to be chapter content. So chapter content, we're going to be writing to that. We name it as chapter content. And again, we only want to show this when editing is checked. And then the button block that we're going to add is a basic button block. It's going to be wide. We're going to have no accents. We're going to show the labels. And the first button we're going to add is the chapter edit button. And then we're going to set this edit chapter with the little edit icon as that chapter edit workflow that we created earlier. And we only want this to be able to be done if chapter editing is not checked. Okay, so if they're not currently editing it, we want to see the button. But when they are in the midst of editing it, we don't want to see the edit chapter button. It wouldn't make sense. Okay, so that's that first button. The second button is a done button. And all we're going to do is set some column values. We're going to set editing as false. Okay, so chapter/editing as false. And we're going to allow this action when chapter editing is checked. So if it is checked, we want to show this done button that sets editing back to false. Okay? And the last one is the button that allows us to regenerate the image if we're not happy with the current image. So this is going to be a call API action. Again, you could use Trigger Webhook, but you'll need to then send the result back in using a post request from whatever you're using, N8N or Make, whatever it is. But it's going to be a call API action. The title is going to be regenerate image. And the endpoint is going to be the user profile N8N image endpoint. So that's that one we set up earlier that currently is not a URL. It just is webhook test or production. So once we've set that, we set the method as post. The content type in the header section is going to be content type application. I don't know why I said that so weird. Application/JSON. And the request body is going to be that illustration body that we were extracting from the array. So if you remember, we had that array that was generated by JSON. We've got the item number 0 or 1 or 2 or 3, and we're extracting that combined illustration body, and we're using it here as the request body. And so the results, once it generates a result, we want that to populate the illustration regenerated image or sort of text field that will return an image URL. And we only want to allow this if there is a response. So if there's no response generated by the AI, the initial generation, which was a column-based call API, if there's no response, we don't want to regenerate it because we haven't actually generated anything yet. Now you can tweak this and maybe have a backup in case it doesn't work, but in general, we don't want to show this button if there's no image because we're not regenerating anything because nothing exists yet. So that's what we want to do for the visibility rules. Okay, so we're calling API, and this is the actual generation of the image. And then for the options, we don't need to touch anything there. And then on the right-hand side of this 2-to-1 or 1-to-2 container, we want to add an image, and the image that we want to display is the display illustration. Okay, so this is, if they've regenerated, it'll show the regenerated, and if they haven't, it'll show the automatic generation that came when we added the chapters. So once we've done that, we can set it as full. We can make it 16:9 because that's the aspect ratio we're actually generating the images in, and we'll set that later in N8N. And for actions and options, we don't actually need to touch anything. Okay, so the actual custom collection of chapters is done. You won't see all these obviously, but the fundamentals will be there ready for you to view it when we actually trigger this. So the next thing we want to do is move on to a button down the bottom. And so we're going to add a button block, and this button block is going to be basic, auto, off, and show. And the action that it's going to trigger is that workflows story regenerate story. So if they don't like what they see in terms of the content of the story, we can regenerate the whole thing, and it will add all the chapters again. It will create the new characters. It will do all of that. And so that's what we want to do, but we only want to allow that if the current step is 0, and the chapter count so the chapters generated, the number of chapters generated equals the total chapters for the arc that we selected. So if there's 9 chapters, we only want to show this button when the number of chapters generated is 9, and then we can allow them to regenerate. We don't want them to preemptively regenerate if it hasn't completed that process of adding the chapters. So we've done that, and we need to set, or we don't need to set visibility because that's actually automatically done based on the button, because we've said only show it on step 0. The next thing we need to do is add a new container, and this container is going to be full, and it's going to be a card. And I'll just change the visibility rules here so we can see. In fact, what we can do is when you're ready, click next, and then you'll be able to actually see what we're doing. So once you've clicked next, add a container, set it as full and card, and then in the options, we only want to show this when the current step is 1. Okay, so if you've set the current step to 1, you should be able to see that card container that you just added. And in this card container, we're going to have an input. Okay, so we're going to have a text entry input. And this input is going to be writing to the story title. And we're going to set the label as story title. And we don't need to set visibility because it's within a container that has visibility rules. Then we're going to add a card collection. So we're going to add a card collection here. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this as the chapters that were just generated previously. Okay, so when we created the story, it generated those 9 chapters and they populated that relation field on the back end. So here we're going to say, okay, let's display them here as a collection, just like we did for the previous custom collection. So once we've done that, all we need to do is set the image as the display illustration. And we can make it a card, extra large, square, fill, 16 by 9, and vertical. And then what we need to do in the options, we can turn off the search and any other things we don't need, because all we need are 2 buttons. So you need to enable advanced, just like we did before. Okay, so click enable workflows. They've changed the language there. It used to be enable advanced, but enable workflows works. And we're going to add 2 buttons. The first is going to be an unselect button. So we're going to write unselect, and we're going to set the icon as the cross icon. And then what we're going to be doing is setting some column values for the user profile story related. And the reason we need to do this is because the collection doesn't know where it is, and it doesn't know what you want to edit. It can only edit what is currently here, which is the chapters themselves. And we don't want to edit that. We want to edit the story. So we need to go to the users table to come back to edit the story. So this user story related is this because we've set the current story and we're currently in Whiskers Autumn Adventure, so we can edit this by accessing it through the layout. So we'll go back to actions. For the unselect button, we're going to set the icon as an X. We're going to set column values for user profile story related. We're going to be setting the thumbnail selected as nothing. We're going to be clearing that value. So when we have selected an image and we want to unselect it, we need to clear that value from the story as the default thumbnail. And we're only going to display this if the display illustration is the screen thumbnail selected. Okay, so if the image we've selected is the image we've selected, is the image for this current card component, then we want to be able to remove it. Else, we want to select as cover. We're going to use this little checkbox, and we're going to set column values again for the user profile story related. But this time, instead of clearing it, we're going to set the display/illustration as the value for the selected thumbnail. And we only want to allow this when the display illustration is not currently the one we've selected. So that was a little bit confusing, but I'll show you what it looks like. If I select this as the cover, the selected thumbnail is now this image, so I can now unselect it. If I select it, it's added it, I can select this, and now it's different. So that's how it actually works, and we can select what cover we want. So I'm glad we got past that weird bug, or perhaps it was my error, but we need to just set that up properly. Then we're going to add a review container, and this is very, very basic. We're just actually reviewing what's going on. So what we need to do, now that you've set up this select cover and edit title page or view, we're going to click next, and this takes us to the final review step before the very last page. So here we're going to add a container, and this container is going to be a full card, and we're going to show this component when the current step equals 2. So when step current equals 2, this is going to be visible. Within this container, we're going to have a title or a text component. The content of this text component is going to be the story title, and we're going to set it as headline medium. Underneath this, we're just going to add an image component, and you don't need to do this, but you can just for visual purposes. We're going to add an image component, and the image is going to be the display thumbnail. So this will either be the default or the one we selected on the previous step. We're going to set the style as square. The aspect ratio, it's 16:9 by default, but we can actually make it 16:9 just in case. And then the alt text, well, we can leave it as the story title. That doesn't really matter. We don't need to set any options or actions for this. It's just a preview of the title. And then we have a collection, and this collection is a card collection. Okay, so it's a card collection, and it's what you see here in the blue box. It's this card collection, and we're going to be displaying the chapters related, just like we did previously, from the story. And the title is going to be the display title. The description is going to be the description, the display content. And the image is going to be the display illustration. We can make it minimal because it's already within a card. If we made it card, I mean, that's up to you how you want to display it. But we can make it minimal. We can set it as extra large, square. We will make this 16:9. and we'll make the orientation vertical. And we don't need to set anything other than the sort by chapter number or actual. It doesn't actually matter. And we just set it ascending. And we don't want any actions. We don't want them to be able to click anything. We don't want them to do anything. This is purely a review step. So they can review the book. And if it all looks good, they can move on to the next step. And I'll just move my head. And the next step is a container that shows when we click this confirm. So what you need to do now is click this confirm button, and we can then edit the last two containers. So again, this is a container that is full and we've made it highlighted. So this emulates what this looked like. We've made it highlighted. And this is squished now. Okay, so you may want to change this or change it to a different type of button. Maybe you want to make it auto, and you can align it like this. That works as well. And that just makes it a little bit more flexible. So when you've clicked this, you're now looking at this last download page. So we've got a container, we've set it as full and highlight, and we only want to show this component when the current step, in fact, we can say it's greater than the final step. Okay, so if we go back, it's hidden. So we've made it only show when the current step we're on is greater than the final step, because we may want to add additional steps in the future. And so for that container itself, we don't need to do anything. Here, we're just going to add a simple title component. The title is going to be the story title. The subtitle will be the story idea. Sorry, I should have been showing it here. It's going to be the story idea. The size is going to be compact. We make the image fill, even though we're not showing an image. And we've got two buttons here that we're going to be displaying. The first is to go back. Okay, so we're going to make the ability to go back available to users. And we're just going to increment a number by -1, and the number we're incrementing is the current step. So it's the same as what we were doing before, incrementing, decrementing by 1. And because we've set conditional visibility for the container itself, we don't need to set conditional for that. And the go to tab is a close button, and this is just going to take us to a tab, and the tab we're taking the user to is the stories tab. So if I click this, it takes me back to the stories. And if I click in, it takes me to where I currently am. The last component is the actual PDF itself. So we add a container, we make it full, and we make it card. We only want to show this, and I'm going to change this, when the current step is greater than the final step. And within this card, we have a web embed with general settings. We've got URL is the PDF plugin, which is actually a link. It's a URL that renders the HTML on screen. And we can make it large or we can make it full. That's totally up to you. And we want to allow scrolling because it's probably going to be a pretty big PDF. And for the options, we don't need to set anything because it's within the container. And that is actually everything in terms of Glide that we need to do. What we need to do next is the image generation itself, and then we come back. So I lied, there's one more thing we have to do in Glide. We have to change that endpoint to the endpoint that we're going to be using. But in terms of layout, that is the full layout. We can go back, we can go into new stories, we can close. Let's get on to the final step, which is setting up N8N to actually generate these beautiful picture book images. Okay, for the last puzzle piece of this entire application, we're going to dive into the actual image generation for each chapter that is stylized. It has consistent characters to the point where they're very close. It's impossible to get it exact unless we completely change the way this is built, which would introduce a lot of complexity. And I encourage you to experiment to see if you can get even more consistent characters. But for now, it's looking pretty good. The kid probably won't know the difference anyway. So we'll roll with that, and it is what it is. But let's jump into the actual image generation. And this is going to be handled by Fal, obviously, because we trained the model earlier. But we're going to use N8N as the method by which we create the image. It took a while to spit that out. So what you need to do is in Fal, you need to go to API keys, so /dashboard/keys, and you should still be logged in because we created that trained model earlier. And you need to add a key and copy that key or write it down somewhere so you can later reference it, okay? Because it's important that we have that. Then in N8N, if you don't have an account, you can create an account, and there are various plans of various costs, or you can set it up virtually for free on your own private server. I do have a video on that. It's $5 a month for basically unlimited everything, which in comparison to the pricing here is a very good deal. But once you have an N8N account, if you go to n8n.io, you can sign up or self-host. Once you've got the account, we want to create a new workflow. So I'm not going to go back now because I have information here that I want to show you and I don't want to lose it. But you create a new workflow. Maybe I can open it in a new tab. So you add a workflow. Once the workflow has been added, if you're part of Loqode Masters, you can just copy and paste the code and it will do all of this automatically for you. But if you don't, there's a few specific nodes that we want to add in order to actually create these beautiful images. So the first one is a trigger node, and it is the onWebhook call node. Okay, so you add this to your workflow, you delete whatever's there currently, you add this to your workflow, and it will look a little bit like this. Okay, so we have a test URL. The method is going to be post. This is your endpoint. We haven't set any authentication because just for tutorial's sake, you can set authentication. I've done other videos on that, but we don't need to do that right now. What we do need to do is set the respond to using respond to webhook node. Okay, what's going to happen is it's going to receive the webhook call, it's going to do everything it needs to do, and then it's going to respond once it gets to that last node. So once you've set that up, that is the trigger complete. Then what we're going to do is add a HTTP request node. And what we're going to do here is we're going to set the method as post. We are going to set the URL as the URL you see on screen. The authentication is going to be generic credential type. The generic authentication type is going to be header authorization. And then you're going to be presented with this header auth that you need to create. Now, if you copied that API key earlier, what you need to do is put the word authorization in the name. And for the value, unlike many other API calls, we're not going to put bearer and then the token. We're going to put the word key, capital K-E-Y, E and Y is lowercase, space, API key, as in the actual API key. So it's going to be key with a capital K, space, and then your API key that you just copied earlier. Okay, so it's a little bit different from most authentications. Now, once you've done that, we want to send body. The body content type is going to be JSON. We're going to specify the body using JSON. And what we're going to do is use this code, which includes the path of the trained model that is coming from Glide. So we're sending that information in the post request. Here's where we're using that endpoint of the model. And here is where we are using the prompt from the illustration object that we extracted. Okay, so the only other thing you need to know is that the scale is set to 0.7 and we want the image size to be landscape 16 by 9. Okay, once you've done that, you should see it probably won't be green for you because you haven't run a test. But assuming you've set everything up correctly, you can actually just set this up and run a production test and it should work. A production run, not a production test. So this is the create HTTP module or node. And what it's going to respond with is not the image itself, because it doesn't actually generate the image. It adds it to a queue. Okay, so, and it's going to say, you can ping this status URL using a GET request to see if it's done yet or not. And so that's what we're going to do in the next node. So if we have a look at the next node, it's another HTTP request node. But this time, we're performing a GET request to that status URL that just came from the previous node. So we're performing a GET request on that status URL, the same exact credential types, except we don't need to set anything else. All we're doing is performing a GET request on this using the authentication we set up earlier. And what this will do is it will respond with either in progress or completed. And so what we need to do is check a couple times. There may be a better method for this, but this is how I've set it up. We need to check maybe every half a second to see when the status changes to complete, because then we can proceed with the rest of the scenario. So this is what we do here. We say if the JSON status, which is this, is equal to completed, then we have a true path. Otherwise, we have a false path or branch, they call it. So if the status is completed, then it progresses down the true path or branch. And if it's not, it progresses down the false branch. And what we've done here is, if it's true, it continues with the rest, and that's great. But if it's false, we're adding a wait node. So if you see here, we're adding a wait node, and we're going to wait for half a second, and then we're going to try again. Okay, so you can see here, this ran 6 times. So it took about 3 seconds for it to go from in progress to complete, because there was 6 failures, and each failure is half a second. So what happens here is that it doesn't progress down the line. It just says, okay, well, if we've waited half a second, let's go back and get the status again. And it checks it. If it's complete, it goes here. If it's not, it waits half a second and does it again. And so what we're doing is we're creating this loop, this ping on the status URL to check, to get it as soon as it's complete, then we can continue. So you can disregard this. It's a bug in the interface. It's not actually running. But what we need to do is, once it's true, once status is complete, then we need to get the result. So just like we performed a GET request on the status, now we perform a GET request on the response URL. So this is the actual image. And you can see here the result was it returned the image itself. So it's just a GET request using a HTTP node. We're performing a GET request on the URL. We're sure that there's a result because the status is complete. And so we know that when we perform a GET request, we're going to get an image. And so once we've got the image, what we need to do is perform a GET request on the image. Okay, so this just says, hey, we've generated an image here. And if we accessed this link, there would be an image. But in N8N, we can't do much with just a URL of an image. We need the actual data of the image. We need the image itself. And so what we do here is we fetch the image itself. And it doesn't return JSON or anything like that. It returns binary data, image data that we can manipulate. So what we're doing here is we're performing another GET request, and this time we don't need authentication because it's on the Fal public image server. And we're performing a GET request on that URL. So we're getting that URL, which returns the actual data of the URL, of the image, sorry. And now we have a file to work with. Before we move on to this merge, you might notice there is another branch that is doing a single action and then joining again for the merge. And what this is if you remember, in that post request, the body contained the link of the overlay image. This was that squiggly thing. So just like we had to go and get the actual image of the AI generated image, we need to do the same for the overlay so we can compose them one on the other. And so what we're doing is we are going all the way back to the webhook, and we are getting, using a HTTP request, we are getting the URL of the overlay. So we're dragging this up in here and we're going and getting the actual data. And there's one extra step that we're doing here, which is we're in the response, we're setting the response format as file, and we're putting it into an output field called overlay. And the reason we're doing this is so we can differentiate between data, which is the AI generated image, and overlay, which is the overlay image. So essentially we're just renaming what this binary file is. That's all it is. Once we've done that, we have a merge node. And what a merge node does is it does not continue until everything connected to it has finished processing. So it will wait. If this was actually processing instead of a UI bug, it would be waiting until this is done. And once it's got both images, then it would proceed. And so for the merge, we're using the combine mode. We're combining by position, and we've got two inputs. And you can see here, we've got the overlay, which we renamed from the generic data, and we've got the data, which is our AI image that was generated by Fal. So we've got the overlay and the data, and now we can proceed to the next step. And I just want to check, yeah, there was nothing else here to explain. So we've got the two images, both have been connected to the merge, and then we can add an edit image node, and we're going to create the composite image. And what that's going to do is it's going to combine the overlay with the AI generated image. So here The operation is going to be composite. The property name is the bottom image. So this is the data. The composite image is going to be the overlay. So data on the bottom, which is our AI image, overlay on top. It's probably opposite for you, but you get the idea. The operator is going to be over. Okay, but you can do many different operations, but we're just going to do over. And the overlay is the same size as the AI generated image. So we can align the top left corners and it will perfectly align the overlay. And what this will do is it will generate a new image. And there's two outputs, but only one of them will have the composite image, which is the data. So we've done this composite using these settings. Then we need to convert it to it was the overlay that is the one. We need to convert it to a base64 string, because right now the image that it just generated is not actually stored on a publicly accessible database or server or whatever. So what we need to do is convert it to base64 so we can send in a post request or in a response to the webhook the image itself in base64. So the operation, this is extract from file. So I'll just say extract from file, move the file, which is in binary, to a base64 string, which is essentially a URL that you can put into a browser and it will render an image. So we're moving the file to a base64 string. The input binary data field is going to be data. The destination output field is going to be data. And then if we go to the next step, this is the respond to webhook node. Okay. I don't know why I just added that. But it's the respond to webhook node. And we're going to respond with text. And the text is going to be JSON.data, which is now that base64 URL, with a little bit of a text before it. So we're saying that it's an image, it's a PNG image, and it's going to be in base64, and then here is the actual image itself in base64. So we're responding with this. And then that's it. That's how it works. So what you do need to do though, is now that you've created this or copied and pasted it, again, it's way easier to just copy and paste because there's so many intricate things here. But once you've created it, you will have your own unique test URL and production URL. What you need to do are copy these URLs, go to your glide, go to settings, go to that if then else in your general settings, and paste the test mode URL and the production URL. And since you've already created the scenario, you can basically save the scenario, make it active, turn this off so it's in production mode, and then run a test. And like with any of these applications that are complex to build, you'll probably get an error and you'll be able to see what the status of the error is and debug from there. And if it works first time, then it's a miracle. But if you're part of Loqode Masters, you can just ask me and I'll help you out straight away. If not, if you're in Loqode school, I'll get to it when I can. But this is the overall application itself. Thank you for taking part in this tutorial. If I've missed anything, you'll probably see a clip added to the end of this. But as far as I can tell, that's it. I know it's a very complex application. I wanted to build it because I said I was going to build it, and I wanted to, deliver on that promise. But there are so many concepts here, so many advanced concepts, that even if you obviously are not going to be building, picture book generators for clients, the fact that you can even build it and create something that is this complex and involved is really going to level up your skills. And anything you get that is less complex than this is going to feel like a walk in the park. So I really encourage you to continue to try and build this app out. And I look forward to seeing what you guys do with the application itself. Until the next tutorial, I will see you later. Thanks for watching.